Fat is like nature's gold. It provides more than twice the energy of carbs or protein by weight. Fats are vital for sustained physical activity, and because they play an essential role in hormone production, cell structure, and nerve function, they are vital for our survival. But fats, like gold, are not that easy to find in the wild. But let's say that you somehow do find yourself with a big pile of fat. Maybe you went on a successful big game hunt, or maybe you just went straight up caveman and stole a kill from a pack of wolves. However you do it, if the weather's warm, you're gonna have to figure out some way to preserve that fat and keep it from spoiling. So I've got two big old chunks of bison fat here. And this is actually fat that came from inside the body cavity, kind of around the kidneys. Now in cold weather, you could just take this and leave it just like this and it would be fine. But in warm weather like we have right now, if I left this fat just raw in this raw state, it would spoil fairly quickly. I'd say within a few days this would be spoiled and you wouldn't want to eat it. And so we're gonna go ahead and render this out into a product that's gonna be completely shelf stable, and if you have a way to seal it up, it'll be shelf stable for years and maybe even decades. Rendering is the process that removes water and other impurities, leaving behind a pure oil. Without moisture, bacteria, which is initially the primary contributor to spoilage, can't grow. In addition to that, the heat of the rendering process sterilizes everything, killing off any bacteria that might have been present on the surface of the fat when you started. So we're going to start just by slicing this up, and the more time you take in this step, the finer that you cut this, the smaller pieces, the more efficient your render is going to be. And so it pays to take a little time and to cut this fine. Warm weather, you're just going to have flies. You just got to deal with it. So this fat is extremely valuable in a wilderness living or survival situation, not only for eating, but for things like leather preservatives, or I've shown in other videos how you can mix rendered fat with things like pine pitch to make antiseptic salves. People have been rendering and using fats and lards for thousands and thousands of years. But unfortunately, a lot of that knowledge is not commonplace now like it used to be. But presumably, that's why you're watching this. Relearn some of those skills that have been lost. So just a little side note on the different types of fat that you'll find in an animal. This is actually a piece of what would be called caul fat. And this is the lacy stuff. If you open up a big game animal, this is the stuff that's going to be enveloping the stomach. It's almost like a support net for the stomach and the intestines. And this stuff is very, very good to cook with. You can take this and wrap it around a tenderloin or a turkey breast or something like that, and then slow roast this over the fire. And it's almost like bacon wrapped turkey breast or whatever it is that you're cooking. Very, very good stuff. But I don't have a turkey breast right now, so we're just going to cut it up and render it. Hummingbird visiting. All right, so we have got a big old pot, about as full of fat as we can get it. Now, I could just take this and put it over the fire and just start slowly melting this fat out. But if you do it that way, it's a little bit more prone to burn and it'll stick to the bottom. And so what we're gonna do is take a little bit of water and put in this. Now, I said previously that one of the goals of rendering fat is to remove all the water. And so why are we adding water into it now? The water is going to help this fat render out without getting too hot. If you get it too hot and you get it to a point where it's smoking, it's not the end of the world, but it will definitely change the color and change the taste of the fat. Putting a little bit of water in there is going to keep things cool, but it's also going to render the fat out very nicely. Now, towards the end of this process, we're going to remove all of this water and we're going to end up with pure oil. Swing my handy dandy little pot holder over here. Just hang this right above this fire. So with the water in the pot like that, you're not going to get this fat too hot. It's not going to get above the boiling point of water. But you do have to kind of keep an eye on the water level in there. And so as this is rendering throughout the rest of the afternoon, we're just going to check it every now and then and add a little bit more water if we need to. So as this fat starts to liquefy and render, it's going to separate from the membrane and start to float on the surface of that water. So I'm just going to keep this fire going and keep this simmering and just add water as needed. Rendering fat like this might take a few hours or it might take a few days. It just depends on how much fat you're working with and how finely you cut the stuff. As I said before, the finer you cut it, the more efficient and the quicker it's going to be. We're looking at probably around 8, maybe 9 hours total on this. And I've added, I think maybe another 2, maybe 3 quarts of water. Just as the water kind of boils out, just add a little bit more and just kind of keep it going. But I think we should be at the point now where we can bring this off and scoop out that membrane that remains. So let's open it up and see what it looks like. That is looking really good. So our fat is mostly rendered, and we're just gonna go ahead and scoop out as much of this membrane that remains. Now, if you had a piece of cheesecloth or a proper colander to filter this through, that'd be great. But if not, just do as best you can with what you've got. So this stuff that I'm scooping out of here doesn't look very appetizing. It actually looks pretty gross right now. But we're gonna take this, what remains, this membrane that remains, we're gonna take this one step farther and end up with basically cracklings. And that stuff will keep, again, with no refrigeration. Don't you just want to eat a big old mouthful of that stuff? This stuff is so good for you. It's like a power food. Natural, fat, grass-fed fat. Look at that, it's beautiful. So we've got the bulk of our membrane filtered out of our fat. Now what I want to do is just build this fire back up, put the pot back on there, and add about another quart or so of water. What this is going to do is allow that fat to float on top of the water, and that's going to allow any other impurities, little pieces of meat or things like that that might still be in here. A lot of that stuff will sink to the bottom of that water. And so when this fat cools and solidifies, we'll just be able to pick up that disc off the top of that water, and that's going to leave a lot of the impurities. And you can repeat that step as many times as you want to continually refine this fat. All right, so we're just going to take this pot and set it in the shade, and we're going to come back to this tomorrow morning when it's nice and cool, and we should have just a cake of pure fat floating on top of that water. While that's cooling, we're going to go and process our remaining membrane a little bit farther. and make it a little less disgusting. A lot less disgusting, actually. It's going to be really good. Trust me. That bullfrog might end up in the grease. What we're gonna do basically is fry this stuff until we're left with cracklings. Some buffalo chicharrones, if you will. So I could probably do that in this clay bowl, but it's pretty close to the top and I don't want to catch this thing on fire because we're gonna have to put it right down in there. And so I'm gonna just use another little pot here. Now, of course, if you don't have another pot, you could just leave this sitting here and it'll be fine. Just set it in the shade. It'll be fine until tomorrow when we can get our fat out of our bigger pot. You could just use the same pot. But I do have another pot, so we're gonna go ahead and use that. You can see all that fat just kind of like already starting to harden up around the edges of this bowl here. So while this is getting going, you need to make sure to keep it stirred if you're going to put it right on the fire like that, because it will burn to the bottom. So anytime a new diet fad comes along, you ought to compare it to how our ancestors lived. Meat, fat, maybe some berries every now and then, that's all you need. So I can remember when I was a kid, the big diet fad was that fat was going to kill us all and that margarine was the solution. Hydrogenated vegetable oils, that'll kill you. This is good, clean fat. This is what your body needs. So there's a lot of fat in here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and scoop out these cracklings. So there we have it. So there's a little bit of cracklings, a little bit of grease that's left in this pot. Now, what I would do is just leave this grease in here. Presumably, if you have fat, you also have meat. And if you leave a little bit of excess grease in your pan, all you gotta do is throw it on the fire, heat it up, and you can throw your meat in there and fry it up. And that was actually, used to be anyway, a pretty common practice in the southern states anyway, is to leave a cast iron skillet just on the stove with hog lard in it and just turn the stove on, heat that up, and throw you a pork chop in there or whatever you're cooking. And when you're done cooking, you just put the lid on it and leave it sitting there and it's just fine. There's nothing wrong with that. So we'll just pour off some of the excess oil here. So these cracklings came out nice and they're super hot right now, but I'm gonna go ahead and just try a couple for you. Little crunchy, kind of like little bacon bits, but made with buffalo. Not bad. They could use some salt, but for not having any salt, just plain cracklings like this, not bad. Now, this stuff will keep like this for a pretty good while. I've never actually maxed it out to try to see how long they'll keep, but I know I rendered out cracklings like this when I was on a loan from my deer, and granted it was fairly cold on that once I had done that, but I just left them in my shelter with no refrigeration, you know, for 2 months, almost 2 months. These things would be great for throwing into stews. You could mix them with a handful of berries and just eat them as is, or you could just sit here and snack on them in your primitive shelter. All right, so the only thing that we have left to do is come back first thing in the morning when it's nice and cool and just pop our fat cake out of our pot, but we're almost done. Beautiful. So I'm just gonna take my knife and run around the edge here and loosen it up. So So that right there is absolute gold. So now all we have to do is let this dry and we're done. Now if you're going to be using this within the next, I'd say, month or so, and it's not super hot, you could just store this in a cool, dry place and leave it on the shelf and it'll be just fine. And that's what I did on season 8 of Alone. I had a disc of fat that was very similar to this, and when I would cook a stew or a rabbit or a grouse or whatever I was cooking, I would just break off a piece and throw it in the pot. If you're gonna go that route, keep in mind though that rodents love this stuff, so you're gonna have to figure out some way to keep them away from it. If you want to store this for longer periods of time, say years maybe, you're going to have to figure out some way to seal this up and keep oxygen away from it, because it will eventually oxidize. If you're doing this at home, simply pouring the hot rendered fat into a mason jar and putting a lid on it is really all you need to do. As the fat cools, it draws the lid down, creating an airtight seal. When done this way, fat will last for years and maybe even decades. We have rendered fat that's been in our pantry like this for years, and it's perfectly fine with no refrigeration. And if y'all want to know more about that process, Liz has a great video over on her channel. I'll put a link in the video description. Now in a survival situation, you might be able to store this in discarded containers that you might find, old Coke bottles or tin cans or something like that. Or in a more primitive situation, this historically would have been stored in things like rawhide bags, and then also the outside coated with tallow. Intestine or bladders would also work very well for that. So in a previous video, I showed how to air dry meat, and now we've got fat. And so that's the primary ingredients for something called pemmican. And so in a future video, that's what we're going to be doing, is making pemmican in a more primitive situation. And then we're going to be storing that in one of those primitive containers that I mentioned earlier. So I hope you all enjoyed this video, learned something, and we'll see you on the next one. Yeah, not bad. Doesn't really have a taste to it. Need some salt.